Okay, well, welcome. This is Geoff Perlman, and this is the Migrating Your 4D app to Xojo. And we're going to be recording this, or we are recording it. So we'll be uploading this to our YouTube channel, which means you don't have to necessarily take, lots of notes and things like that. You can actually just watch it, and then you can share the URL with other people, or watch it again yourself, etc. I'm just going to get some controls up here for me. Okay, there we go. All right. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A panel in Zoom. Type them in there. I'll get to all the questions at the end. I've got a lot of material to cover, so if we stop to answer every question as we go along, we're not gonna get done. So just use the Q&A panel, and I'll answer the questions at the end. So, who am I? I'm Geoff Perlman. I'm the founder and CEO of Xojo. What credentials do I have to talk about 4D? Well, I was a user of 4D from 1987 to 1998, and I was the training manager at ACS, which is now 4D Inc., from 1990 to 1994. And I'm the author of Inside Fourth Dimension, published by Cybex. That was a hefty tome that was published back in somewhere 1992, I think, or 93. Anyway, it was a big book. Took me a year to write, and it's a bit out of date now, but it's still useful for hand-to-hand combat and keeping doors open, things like that. And since 1996, I've been founder and CEO of Xojo Inc. So I've got lots of experience with 4D and with Xojo, though my experience with 4D is not as current, obviously, as it is with Xojo. Before we get started into today's topic, I want to mention that we're doing a special event this year at Xojo. It's called the Year of Code. And what it is it's to help those that are new to Xojo learn faster. That would be many of you, perhaps. It also helps experienced users learn new skills. It's fun, have lots of fun. We'll have a theme each month. And what you do is you build a simple little app that goes with that theme. It's like a competition, and it'll run through November of 2025 this year. And then we'll have winners that we announced in December, and there will be prizes. So that'll be pretty cool. If you want to get more information on this, there's the URL to go to. And again, we're recording this, so you don't have to try to write all that down. You can check it out once we upload this to YouTube later today. All right, what are we going to cover today? Well, first, we're going to talk about Xojo licensing, because I know that's a big deal. We're going to talk about what platforms we support, learning the basics, choosing a database engine. If you're coming off of 4D, then you're not going to be using 4D anymore, and so you're going to need to pick a database engine. We'll talk about that. If you're using plugins in 4D, what do you do about your plugins? If you're using the 4D modules, what do you do about that? And porting your database structure / schema to the database engine of your choice. How do you do that? We'll talk about that. Now, Xojo uses SQL for queries and such. So if you haven't been using SQL, you'll need to learn some SQL, and I'll talk a little bit about that. I'm going to show you how to connect to, query, and update in a database. I'm going to show some basic stuff just to give you an idea of what's involved. What do you do about recreating your 4D forms in Xojo? DB Kit, which is something that I've actually created myself, and it's something we provide that does the mapping of database columns to your UI to make things just easier, write less code. I'll give you a demonstration of that. What do you do about porting code from 4D to Xojo? Reporting, debugging, look at debugging, and then building your standalone app at the end. And what do we have in terms of support? So those are the topics we're going to be covering today. Again, if you have questions, use the Q&A panel, and I'll get to all the questions at the end. All right, licensing. Let's go over this really quick. We have always sold a developer license, not a runtime license. So when you buy a license for Xojo, you're buying a license to be able to build and distribute applications. You can build as many apps as you like, and you can distribute them as often as you like. There's no limitations. In fact, your license gets you 12 months of updates, but think of it like a magazine where uh, that 12 months, you get all the new versions of Xojo that come out. And if you don't renew your license or your subscription, then you can still use the ones you have. You can still keep building apps with the versions of Xojo you've got. You just won't get updates. So that's how that works. Again, like a magazine. So yeah, when it expires, you'll renew to get to continue to get updates. And if you don't renew, you can still use the versions, like I said, that you had that were active while your license was active. Okay, supported platforms. You can run the Xojo IDE on Linux, which includes Raspberry Pi, because we support Linux on ARM, Mac OS, and Windows. For processors, we support ARM and x86. For building desktop apps, you can build for Linux, again, including Raspberry Pi, Mac OS, and Windows. Web, Linux, Mac OS, and Windows, so you can build web applications. Mobile applications, Android, iOS, and iPad OS. And we build console apps. Console apps for Linux, Mac OS, and Windows. These are apps that have no UI whatsoever. So they're great for servers and things like that. So you can build console apps as well. All right. So learning the basics. You're going to be coming from a different development tool, different language. And the first thing you should do is just learn the very basics of Xojo. We have desktop, web, and mobile quick starts. That's just a 10-minute, introduction. Throw a couple controls in there, write a little bit of code. Those are great to use. I would definitely start with quick starts. Next, we have tutorials. These are a little longer. I think they take maybe an hour to finish. They're worth going through as well. You're learning something new. This will clear up a lot of the basic questions for you. We've got over 300 example projects. So there's examples for virtually everything. There's over 2,700 pages of documentation. Don't let that discourage you. The documentation's there just when you need it. And it's well organized and lots of example code in there as well. Xojo compiles to machine code. There's no interpreter, not even when you're running from the IDE. Even when you just press run, it's building a binary application. All it does is it sticks some debug code in there so it can talk to our debugger. Aside from that, it's exactly the same as building your final app. So there's no interpreter involved at all. Xojo is object-oriented, event-driven, and strongly typed. So I know that 4D has introduced some object orientation. Object-oriented, or Xojo rather, has been object-oriented since day one. It's event-driven, so that means that controls and things, your UI have events. Even some classes that don't have any UI are event-driven as well. So you respond to events. And it's strongly typed, and strongly typed simply means that once you set the type of a property or variable, it can't be changed. You're probably familiar with that from 4D, because 4D, when they added the 4D compiler, they added the ability to strongly type. That's all that means. Names. John Foster, who's a 4D developer that you guys know, and he's been working on porting an app to Xojo, wanted me to mention this. When you name something like a variable or a method or a class, it can be any length. It can't begin with a number, though it can have numbers in it. You can't use spaces, but you can use underscores, and no special characters are allowed. If you try to type anything that it doesn't allow, it'll just beep at you, and you'll know right away that you can't use it. But anyway, so you don't have to worry about trying to shorten your names to make them fit, because they can be. I've never heard anyone ever say that they reached the length of a name. I'm guessing that it's either 32,000 characters or something beyond that. It's very, very long. All right, and Xojo is not just for database applications. The great thing about Xojo is that it is a general development environment. You can build database applications in it, but you can build a whole lot more, and you'll see some examples of that during the presentation today. I strongly urge you in the beginning to create a small exploratory project. Pick some little thing that maybe you've always wanted to build. It doesn't even have to be database oriented, just to get your feet wet and learn the basics of Xojo. If you start off with the biggest project that you've got, that's going to be a lot more pressure. So I remember back in the days of the Apple II, I got this 3D program for generating wireframe 3D models. And the first thing I did was a cube. So I could just rotate a cube around. And, cube is what? That's 8 points, I guess. And my second project after the cube was a Klingon battle cruiser. It was like 300 points, and that was quite a leap from something simple to very complex. So start with some small exploratory project, and you'll be off to the races. Okay, so choosing a database engine. You're likely not going to be using 4D Server anymore. So what do you use? Well, for single user, we have SQLite built in. It's arguably the most popular database engine in the world, and it's free, which is great. So for single user, you can use that. You can use that on all the platforms, desktop, web, and mobile. So it's there for everything. For multi-user, you're going to be using MySQL, PostgreSQL, or ODBC if you need to get to a database that's not MySQL or Postgres. And by the way, we provide a hosting service for our web applications, and it includes MySQL and Postgres built in. So those are already there. There's no limit on the number of database connections. And by no limit, I really, really mean that. You can connect to any number of SQLite databases, any number of MySQL databases or Postgres, any number of database servers, all at the same time. There's no limit at all. You could have 1,000 SQLite, databases open and be connected to 100 MySQL servers. I mean, there's probably RAM considerations there, but in terms of any hard limits, there are no hard limits on the number of database connections. Now, for web apps, you probably want to use the session object. The session object is something it gets instantiated for each session, each user that connects. And for a typical database application where each user is, connecting and maybe searching and adding records and things like that, you'll want to store a reference to your database connection in the session object. I'm just mentioning that because for a desktop application, for example, we have an application object, and that's kind of a global place to store it. But for a web app, the session object is usually the right place. 99% of the code you write to access your database is going to be the same regardless of the engine. So whether it's MySQL, Postgres, ODBC, SQLite, 99% of it's going to be the same. These engines have some things that are minorly different, but that's pretty rare that you're going to run into that. Most of it's going to be the same. Now for mobile, if you're using SQLite, you can use SQLite in mobile and have the SQLite database just as a file, that your mobile app accesses. But if you're going to access a database server, smartphones and tablets and stuff, they won't allow you to keep a connection open constantly. If it's open too long, the operating system will cut it off. That's not just databases, it's anything. So if you're going to access a database server from a mobile app, then you need to use a REST API. And a Xojo web app is a great back end. You can write a Xojo web app to, handle the business logic and manage the database access. And then your mobile app can use a REST API to talk to your Xojo web app. There's a class in Xojo called URL connection. It's great for this. And I'm sure we've got some URL connection examples, but that's just at a high level. The mobile app will use URL connection to talk to a Xojo web app, or it could be a console app. It's up to you, but a web app is really good for this because it handles a lot of this stuff for you. So that's just a real high level in terms of mobile. All right. Let's say you're using some plugins with 4D. What do you do about that? Well, we have third-party plugins for Xojo as well. If you go to our documentation, go to resources, and then to extras, you'll see a whole bunch of the plugins that are available. They're not the only ones, but it'll point you to plugin developers that sell commercial plugins, and there's free ones as well. Now, if you've written your own plugins in 4D, then you have two choices. You can port your plugins to Xojo and use our plugin SDK. If you're going to, if you have a plugin that you sell and you want to be able to sell it to the Xojo community, that would probably be the best way to go. If it's something you're using just in your own application, in that case, you could consider using the declare command in Xojo. If your plugin is essentially a wrapper for a library, then this is really probably the best way to go. I would at least investigate it first. Just look up the declare command. You give it a library, you tell it what method, and you can call the method. And this works for the operating system as well. So if there's a feature that you need to access, an API that's part of the OS, and you don't have a plugin or something for it, declares work for that as well. So for any library at all, that's what declares are for. And we have a new feature coming soon, which we call libraries, and it allows you to take any part of your Xojo code, windows and classes and everything, and essentially make the equivalent of a plugin out of them. Now, these plugins are just for Xojo, but if you have code that you use and you want to have kind of a version of it that you use in a bunch of different apps, it's great for that. It's also great if you want to sell, if you've written something in Xojo and you want to sell it to other Xojo developers. So that's a feature that is coming soon, later this year, libraries. All right, 4D modules. If you're using the 4D modules, what do you do about that when you port to Xojo? Well, first of all, the 4D Calc module, our list box is actually pretty good in terms of providing kind of cells and rows and columns. And I have an example I want to show you. So I'm going to switch over to that. Let's see. Okay. I'm going to open up example here. Now, this is very simple. If you're using 4D Calc just for, again, rows and columns and calculations, you'll see that this example does that. So I can go in here and I can say, okay, I'm going to change that to 10, and you can see that on the fly it's updating the calculation. And this is very simple. This is just our normal list box. If we go behind the scenes here, um, we can, let's see, what I want to show you. Oh, yeah. Okay, so what I've done is I made a subclass called my calc list box. This is a subclass of our list box control, and that's what's on here. In fact, if I show the inspector, you can see it's a my calc list box, right? So it's got some event handlers and it's got some methods. Well, one method, convert to number. So when a cell is pressed, I make that cell editable, calling edit cell at. And when the text is changed, I'm simply doing the obvious calculations. I get the price. Uh, Cells in Xojo and a list box are all text, so I convert it to a number. I've got a little function here for converting to number. I get the quantity, price times quantity, and then I update the third column, and because the columns start at 0, 0, 1, 2, and I can give it a format. Here's the value line total, and there's the format, and that's pretty much it. Oh, and then in the opening event of my list box, I'm setting the column alignments to right because I want the numbers to be right aligned. And that's it. And so this little class here, I could now copy this into any project and it would work just as you just saw. I wouldn't have to do anything else. And if you wanted your users to be able to assign formulas to cells, so Xojo has something built in, a class called Xojo script. Xojo script is essentially our compiler. It's not the linker, it's just the compiler, but it can be built into your app. And so you can give it code on the fly at runtime and ask it to compile that. So I haven't done that with this, but I could build Xojo script functionality into my little mycalc list box and then have a way to let a user assign a formula to a cell, a column, whatever. And then to get it to execute that, I would just pass it to Xojo script, let it execute it, get the result back, and populate my list box. So anyway, this is just a quick little example of something you could do with a spreadsheet-like interface. All right. So for Xojo, for 4D Calc rather, I would use the list box. Now, what about 4D right? Well, Xojo has a styled text control. It's called text area, and I've got a demo of that as well. So let's go grab that. Okay, so I'm going to run this so you can see how this works. All right, so this is an example I created. I'm going to make this available in our examples. The text area itself is just the white area at the bottom here. I've then created my own toolbar to add some of the formatting things you need. So for example, I can select some text and I can go to my pop-up menu. Xojo has access to all the fonts. It'll tell you how many fonts are installed. You can get every font. That's how I'm building this pop-up menu. So I can go pick a font. Let's get something interesting. What's this one? Oh yeah, okay, there we go. And I can make the text bigger, the selected text. I can make it italic. Well, I guess there's no italic for that one. Or bold. Okay, well, let's pick something else. Okay, so let's grab this and we'll make that bold and make it a little bigger. And I can make this word italic as well. And I can make this one underline. So you've got all the styled text. I can also choose the, oh, here, I gotta highlight this and let's see, center. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so you can set the alignment of paragraphs. That's a paragraph by paragraph basis. And I can even change the color of text. This is the color picker, it's built in. And let's make that magenta. There we go. So the text area control gives you a lot of style text capability. And what I've done here is just build a little style text editor. My plan is to eventually add the ability to load and save RTF format, so you have some way of storing the style text. That's not in here right now. And the way this is built is I've got a container control. I think it's sort of like a subform in 4D. It's a layout that isn't a window. It can be put into a window or into a web page because we have them for the web as well. So here's my text area control, and then above it, I've got my toolbar, and that's another container. So this is a container that is all my toolbar controls, and I've just dropped it into this other container. So it's a container within a container. And then that whole thing, my text editor, is just dropped onto this window. You can see there it is. It's a text editor. So you can combine layouts within layouts. And that's what I've done here to demonstrate styled text. All right. That's for right. For chart, we have a whole bunch of classes built in for charting. If you go to File, New Project, and you click on Examples, these are all the examples. You can search them. For example, if I type chart, I can see the ones that have chart in the name. Let me go, let's see, where is charting? Here, let's do this. Trying to remember which one I wanted to show. I think it's this one. Yeah. Okay, here we go. Now I'm showing all this on a Mac, but I could be doing all this on Windows or on Linux as well. So this is just an example project that shows the chart control. And so this is the chart control here. The person that built this added these extra checkboxes at the bottom so that you could, see different attributes, different things you can control. You've got data that shows up these little tips that appear as you scroll across it. And there's every kind of chart you could really need. I mean, this is just 3 of them. There's others as well. And we have built-in PDF support. You can save it to PDF, and not just for charts. We have PDF support in general in Xojo. So we've got great charting built in. So that's for charts. And then drawing. So we have a canvas control in Xojo. The canvas control is basically just a blank area. And then we have a graphics class that you can use to draw into that area. And it automatically refreshes for you. You don't have to generally do that. You can draw bitmap graphics or vector graphics. and it will really do just about anything. You can use it to build custom controls. I've done that myself. And my favorite example of what our canvas is capable of is one of our users a long, long time ago decided to write a CAD application. And this is a screenshot of it. It's called Real CAD. And it is a full-blown CAD application, as you can see. And this is all written in Xojo. So, um, and he's even used this to design like sailboats and blimps and all kinds of stuff that's been built from the designs that he created in his app. And this again, all written in Xojo. So you can do anything you want graphically with our canvas control in our graphics class. And by the way, when you in terms of the graphics class, the canvas control gives you a graphics object to draw into and gives you all the controls of fonts and drawing text and shapes and all that. Well, when you print or go to PDF, it's the same thing. The difference is like when you bring up the print dialog, or tell it you want to print, it just delivers back a graphics object and you do the exact same drawing into that object and then that gets sent to the printer. So I'm not trying to demo that today, but I just want to pass that along. All right, porting your 4D structure. So from 4D, you can export the structure to XML. If you go to this website, you can convert that XML structure to JSON. You can then take the JSON code and you can import it with an app like Tables Plus. Tables Plus is what I use and it's cross-platform. So you can import the structure right into that and it will create the SQL database structure with all your columns and tables and all that stuff. So that's a way to get that structure over. Now, the data, you're gonna have to export the data and import it into that structure. But aside from that, you could obviously do it over the internet or something if you really wanted to. But if it's especially if it's single user, this would be a way to migrate. Now, learning SQL. If you have not used SQL before, if you've been using the 4D query language, then SQL will be something new. We use SQL for all the queries and database manipulation in Xojo. So just for some examples, this is what an insert looks like when you're basically creating a record. Obviously, you're going to write this code and then your user is just, using your interface and this is what will insert it behind the scenes. I, I want to say that 4D used to have a command called add record, I think. And this would be kind of the equivalent of that. You say insert into, you give it a table, you tell it the columns you're inserting into, then you give it the values, and the values are in a separate set of parentheses, and that inserts those values into the columns. A query you call select. Star means you want all the columns from and then the name of the table. If you want specific columns, you can replace the star with a comma delimited list of columns. If you're updating records, you call update, table name. You can set one or more columns to values, and then you have a where clause at the end to narrow it to the rows that you want to have impacted. In this case, it's going to be just the one that has, ID equal 1, but it could be where, state equals Texas or something like that. And then for deleting rows, it's delete from, table name, and again, a where clause. And just like you have in 4D, SQL has transactions, begin transaction, commit, and rollback, and they pretty much work the same way as they do in 4D. So yeah, and I'll show you a bit of that in a little bit. So now we're going to talk about connecting, querying, and updating, and I want to give you some more examples. So we're going to show connecting to a database. We'll do some queries. I want to talk about SQL injection attacks. This is something you do have to think about with SQL, but we've got an easy solution for that. And I'll explain what those are. And then we'll talk about updating and deleting rows and transactions. Okay, so how do you connect to a database? There's a couple of different ways. I'm going to show you how to do it in code first. So if I was going to connect to a SQLite database, let's say an application that just needed to connect to a database, get some data, and disconnect, for example. So here I'm creating a local variable called DB, and I'm making it a new SQLite database object. And then I'm setting the DB's database file property. That's part of the SQLite database class to the database. Now, how do I get to the database? Well, in this case, we're assuming that the database is called my database and it's on the desktop. Xojo has a special folder function, or rather module, that has a desktop object that has a child method. So basically, this is saying there's a file on the desktop that I want to access, and it's assigning that file to the database file so that the database knows which file you're dealing with. And then you call connect, db.connect. Now, you'll notice that I have this inside of another statement, try catch. This is how errors are handled in Xojo. What you do is there aren't error codes in the traditional sense. You put all the code that might cause an error, like say in a method or an event, whatever, in between try and catch. And if an error occurs of the type that is listed under catch, in this case a database exception, it'll automatically drop down there and execute whatever's there. In this case, to keep it simple, I'm just displaying a message box, which is like an alert in 4D, and I'm displaying a message connection error, and then the error object, this database exception, has a message property that'll have the message in it. Usually these messages are for you as a developer. Typically, if something, is gone that wrong for the user, like their internet connection dropped or the file was locked or who knows what, you're going to want to you're going to want to deal with that. Again, if you have questions, put them in the Q&A panel. I'll get to them at the end. But yeah, you can have any number of statements between try and catch, and you can have multiple catch statements. So this one's for database exception. You could have another one if you're opening a file, like if you're accessing a file. There's a type of exception called IO exception for errors that occur with files. So you can have any number of those here, and it just keeps your code nice and clean. You can have a whole bunch of lines of code without any error checking because your code's just going to drop down to the catch area should there be an error. But this is the very bare bones basic of accessing or opening and connecting to a SQLite database via code. Now, for a server, it's a little more complicated. There's more data. In this case, I'm creating a variable called DB and making a new PostgreSQL database class object. That's one of the classes built in. Obviously, it's a server, so you need the host, the port, the name of the database on that server, username and password, and then you connect, just like you did with SQLite. So there's a little more information you need to provide, but then it's basically the same thing. You just call db.connect. Now, that's how to do it from code. But we also have a way to connect without writing any code, and that's called a database connection. So I'm going to do a quick little demo of that. All right, so let's just use this one. I'm going to go to the insert menu and I'm going to insert a database connection. And let's use SQLite. So that creates this object, SQLite database 1. And now I need to assign this a database. So I'm going to open it up and I'm just going to pick development. We'll come back to this in a minute. And over the inspector, I can tell it which file I want. So I'm going to go to my projects here and I'm going to go get a SQLite database. Okay, it's connected. I can even press this button in the toolbar and I can see the columns and rows and things. Now, why are there these 4 items here, development, alpha, beta, and final, underneath this database? Well, this allows you to have up to 4 different databases in this one connection. So for example, let's say you have a database that you use just for your development. For alpha testing, you have a different database that you use. For your beta users, you have yet another SQLite database. And then when you ship, you have your final shipping database. Well, you can set each one of those databases here. And then when you build your app, you will see that you have a stage code. And notice they're all the same. So if you set the stage code to development, when you hit the build button up here to build your app, it's going to build in with the database that you assigned under development. If you making your beta, you choose beta, it's automatically going to include the information for the database you set for beta. So it just, and this is the same is true for MySQL and Postgres and ODBC. It just simply makes it really easy for you to have different databases you use for different stages of your development. And this is a really useful feature. We actually we had an engineer once who thought he was building an application. He thought he was pointed to his beta database that he was using internally, but he was actually pointed to our live database, and we were able to recover from it. But that's the kind of mistake that you can avoid by using this. All right, so querying the database. So basically, again, I'm using a try catch in case anything goes wrong. I create a row set. A row set is the equivalent of a selection in 4D. It's like that. The difference being, and my knowledge of 4D might be a little out of touch now, but in 4D, at least when I used it, the selection was just references to the rows themselves, not the actual data. In a row set, it is the data. So you get the data here. In my case, my database connection was I called it Eddies. We have a database we use for demos called Eddies Electronics. So I call select SQL and I give it a selection. And now I've just got the rows. Now to do something with those rows, let's move on. I can check the row count property of my row set. And if it's 0, tell the user, hey, no customers found. That's easy enough. But what if we want to process the rows? All right, so let's go a little deeper. If the row count is not 0, it's going to drop down to else. And we have a for loop. Now, I don't know if there's a for loop like this in 4D. We have traditional for I type loops, but this is a for each loop where you can define a variable, and then for classes that support it, it just auto-populates the variable for you. So each time it goes through this loop, it's going to populate the next row, and database row is a class in Xojo from my row set called rows. So in this case, it's going to take a control called phone pop-up, call add row, and then this is the row set again, row.column, told which column, dot string value, and it just loops through them. Okay, so now let's go to window 1, and I'm going to add a pop-up menu that we will populate with the last names of people in the customers database in the database we're connecting to. So I've added my pop-up menu. Now I'm going to double click, and I can see all the events. Xojo's event driven. And the event I want is the opening event. That's the event that fires when the layout opens, and I want to populate the pop-up menu from there. So click OK. And now we're ready to write the code to do the query and populate the pop-up menu. Okay, and I'm going to make a variable called rows as row set. A row set holds rows. That's a class in Xojo, and I'm going to put rows equals SQLite database 1. Now it was called SQLite database 1 automatically, but you can call it whatever you want. And I'm going to put a dot and select SQL, and I'm going to do select star from customers. That's going to select all of the columns. I could just pick the last name, but let's just do them all. And then I want to load them into my pop-up menu. So I'm going to use a for each loop, for each row, that's a variable row, as database row. Row sets are made up of database rows in rows. That's the row set. So it's going to populate the row each time through with the row from the row set. So I don't have to do that. It's going to do it for me. And next. Okay. And then we're going to use me. Me relates to this control because we're in the opening event of the pop-up menu. So me just means the pop-up menu. And we'll do add row. And then we'll do row, because that's our database row, dot column. Put last name, dot string value. Now, there are many different kinds of values you can get. depending on the column, right? So there's double value, date, time, integer, etc. This is a string, so I'm going to use string value, and that should add it to the row, and rather build all the rows to make up the pop-up menu. So let's run and see what happens. And there it is. There's all my pop-up, or there's all my last names, so that you can see how easy it is to do a query. All right, SQL injection attacks. This is something you do have to worry about with SQL. And it basically, a SQL injection attack is where a malicious user tries to get a SQL call into your application. And you think, well, how could they do that? Well, let's look at this example. Okay, so I'm doing a SQL select star from customers where last name equals, and I'm appending the text in this control called last name, right? So imagine you've got a field on a layout and it's called last name. I'm just taking their last name and adding that to my query, right? Well, a user with this exact code, because you're just appending it to the SQL call, they could type this, right? And what would happen is that would append a semicolon, which ends the SQL call, the select, and then would call drop table and delete your table. So you don't want that. The good news is this is really easy to defend against. We have something in Xojo called a prepared statement. So in a prepared statement, it's ever so slightly different. You simply put a question mark. It depends on the database server or database engine you're using. Most of them use question mark. You can look up the right symbol for other ones. I think Postgres uses like $1, $2 kind of thing. But anyway, you put a question mark, a placeholder, and then you separate your parameters as individual parameters. So in this case, what's going to happen is you see the comma. So we've got two parameters for select SQL. We've got our SQL statement and then the value from the text property of this control. So because you're separating them, you've got the SQL statement and then the value is two separate things. They're sent to the database separately, and the database engine can then look at the value that you're going to use, the text from this last name, and see if it has any SQL in it. If it does, you'll get an error and it won't get injected into the select SQL. So it's really, really simple to guard against SQL injection attacks. And if you're doing something really sophisticated where you're building a select statement in code and all that kind of stuff, we actually have classes for prepared statements that you can use in that situation. But in a lot of the common situations, you just use a placeholder and your value, and that's it. It's really straightforward. Now, updating and deleting rows. It's the same kind of deal. You have whatever you called your database object. In my case, I'm calling it Eddie's. It was called SQLite1 in the example I was using, but you just call execute SQL and you give it the SQL statement. It's really that simple. Now, keep in mind, of course, that this would then be followed by whatever else code. I'm keeping this really, really simple by just having one call between try and catch, but you could have as many as you want. And try and catch are for anything that could cause an error, not just databases, accessing files, internet stuff, whatever. It's our overall error trapping system. And then for deleting, it's once again execute SQL and you pass the delete command. Basically, you use select SQL for all your queries and execute SQL for everything else. Now, transactions. Transactions are at the database level. So since in this case, that's my database object. So I call begin transaction. I can do any number of commands and then commit transaction or roll back. In this case, I'm only doing one, but again, you could do as many as you want in between. So you have begin transaction, commit transaction, and then roll back transaction if that's needed. So transactions are pretty straightforward. All right, recreating your forms. So you've got all these forms in 4D, and they've got all these controls all over the place. And what do you do about recreating them in Xojo? Now, Yeah, that would be a headache. It's kind of grunt work. It's, time consuming just to, I mean, we have a drag and drop editor just like 4D does, but it's still a lot of work if you have a lot of forms, if you have a big application. Um, so I got an idea earlier this week, and remember I told you back in the beginning that Xojo's for building any kind of application. So I had the idea of maybe I could find a way to automate the process of migrating a 4D form to Xojo. And I'm going to show you how far I got. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to open my 4D form to window, Xojo window converter. Now, before we go to that, I'm going to show you I've got a small 4D project here. And you can see here's the form. I'm going to show you what it looks like. I don't have 4D on my machine, so I'm going to show you a screenshot. That's what the form in 4D looks like, right? It's basic stuff. Call first name, last name, couple buttons, checkbox, etc. Okay, so again, this isn't even beta, it's alpha, but I'm going to demonstrate it for you now. So I'm going to run my project. Again, type your questions into the Q&A panel and I'll get to those at the end. So, and I'm going to make this project available. I'm probably going to make it a open source project, but anyway, let me demonstrate it first. All right, so I'm going to go into my, let's see, I'm going to find that small project. Here we go. I'm going to open that up. I'm going to find that. Here's the form, right? Select it. Again, this is something I built in Xojo. So I've selected my 4D form. Now it wants me to save the converted window. Let's go back here and I'll save it here. Okay. And if we go over to the Finder here, you can see there it is, converted window, right? All right. So now let me make a new project and I'm going to drag this window that I converted from 4D into my project, and there it is. So using this application that I just started, on Monday afternoon, um, you can take a 4D form and you can port it to Xojo. And you will notice if we expand this, that all of the names from 4D, the names of the controls are all supported. It supports all of the properties. Now, if there's a property that we don't have that 4D does, it obviously can't do anything with that. But all the common stuff is there. Resizing, style text, whether it can get the focus, whether it's visible or invisible, all that kind of stuff is there. So that's a simple form. But I also have a little more complex one. Let's go back to the app and I'll click the button again. And I had John Foster, who you all know, he's a 4D developer. I had him just throw every 4D control onto a layout, and it's messy, but it'll do the job. That's why I called it 4D Object Mess. And I'm going to pick that form from that project. And let's save it. Let's see. Let's save it to here. Oh, what happened there? No, there we go. Save it to there. Okay. And there's that one. Okay. And I'm going to drag that one into here. Okay. And there it is. Oh, I didn't show it to you. Sorry. I'm getting ahead of myself. That's what it looks like in 4D. Okay. It's like all the controls. And I did the same thing here. So there's all the controls. Now, 4D does have some controls that we don't have. We have some controls 4D doesn't have. So when there's a control that isn't supported, I just put a label and I put unsupported and the name of the control type from 4D. Now you could create these controls using controls in Xojo, but we don't have one that's a perfect match to it. In his example, he had 3 tabs. There's the tabs with their names. I got a bug where my headers didn't come in correctly. I did create the right number of columns, but he named them H1 and H2. I gotta go look at my headers and see why they didn't make it in there, but I'll fix that. And when you run this, oops, I gotta select the right window. Let's go back here and we'll go to the inspector and tell it we want the default window to be converted window one. Okay, there's my window, and you can see even the values for the pop-up menus are there and the combo box. If the hierarchical list or the list box had rows, they would be there. You got your sliders and check boxes and radio buttons, progress bar. You guys call these little different things, but you get the idea. Oh, the rectangle's not showing up, and why? Because that rectangle, he set it to invisible, and my converter supports that, so it's not currently visible. When I go back to the layout editor, you will see it. I don't have any HTML showing here or a web page, but that's the HTML viewer. Got a line control. And in 4D, you have a concept called a subform. We do have that in Xojo. We call it a container control. But I'd have to create the container and then make it appear here, and that's a little more than I've got a chance to do in a few days. But you can see I've gotten pretty far. Another interesting thing is that in 4D, they don't always define the size of the window. This window, for example, in the 4D data, it doesn't say how wide or tall it is. So my form converter actually loops through all the controls to find which point is the furthest to the right and the furthest down, and then it sets the size based on that. So it's doing that part too. I've got a lot of other ideas for this, but I'm gonna do a little more work on this, and then I'm gonna make it a open source project so that other 4D developers who are also using Xojo can contribute to it. I guess there's a group box up there that might be set to hidden as well. Anyway, if you go back to the layout editor, you can see there's the group box. Let's see if that's hidden or that's a bug. Oh, yep, see, not visible. So that did the right thing. And there's the rectangle, and it's also not visible. So I'm going to make those visible just so we can see. And we'll run again. And yeah, see, there's the group box now, and there's the rectangle. So anyway, the converter does all that for you. It would save you a whole lot of time in converting your forms. I can make this work for the web as well. This version only does desktop, but making it work for the web would be very, very easy. I might do that too before I upload it to make it open source. What you'll want to do is get on our forum and create an account. If you create an account to download Xojo, you'll have an account on our forum. So just go to our forum and frequent that. When it's available for open source, I'll post a link to it on the forum. But that's the little converter I've created. And again, I wrote this in just a few days, and I, my knowledge of 4D is pretty old, so I had to kind of start over from scratch because there wasn't any JSON support in 4D back when I was using it. Also, Xojo itself is written in Xojo, so everything you see in the Xojo IDE, that's a Xojo project, and that's all Xojo code. So if you see it in the IDE, that means you can do it in Xojo. All right, let's keep going. All right, so dbKit. All right, so when you're building a database application, you typically have to write code to get, at least in Xojo, because it's not built just for databases, you have to write code to get data in and out of the user interface. And that kind of code is, boring grunt work. In 4D, it does that part for you in most cases. So that's why I built something called dbKit. It's one of our examples, and I'm continuing to make it more and more powerful. So I'm going to give you a quick demo of that. Let's close this and that, and we'll go to dbKit. Okay, now I'm going to be showing you this is a more recent version than the version that's actually available right now. This is the next big beta that I'm going to be putting out. That's why I had it called refactoring, because I've been refactoring a lot of code. And this is available for the desktop and for the web. I don't have a mobile version yet, but I plan to have one. And you can see I've got my Eddie's Electronics database. I'm using database connections. I've got one for SQLite, MySQL, and Postgres because I'm testing it. And dbKit is just a module that you put into your project. It's right here, and it's got a bunch of subclasses of all of the built-in controls and things you might need for a database project, and you just drag them onto your layout. So for example, here's a single window layout. I've got a search field and I've got a list box for search results. And then when you click on a row in the list box, it fills the fields in here. These are the obvious things, first name, last name. You're not seeing labels because I'm using hints instead. And you'll see when we run this, if we have a new record or a blank record, it'll say last name, first name, last name, that kind of thing. So it'll auto-populate that. There's pop-up menus. This is a custom control I made. I made my own date time picker, and it's a canvas control, but you'll see it draw a date in there. And then I've got this little button bar at the bottom. Again, this is built into dbKit that gives you delete, new, undo, and edit. Now, to just show you how automated this is, how it doesn't take much of any code at all, if you look at all these controls, none of them have any indication that there's any code. The only two here, these are groups. I've grouped all the labels together, but there's no actual code there. That's just a grouping feature. There's no code in this layout at all. So I'm going to run, and single brings up that single window. Now, this is just macOS security. I'm accessing a SQLite database, so it wants access to it, so I'm going to allow it access. And there it is. So there's all my rows, and I click, and it auto-populates the data, and I can search for, people whose, last four or first three letters of their last name. It's actually searching on last name and first name. And then if you click edit, and you notice that these are all disabled, if you click edit, then everything becomes editable, and I can change this, and I can click done, and it updated the list box. And if I was editing and I made a mistake, I could change a bunch of things here. Let's change this and let's change that. And I realized, oh, I made a mistake. Click undo. It just reloads the record as if you didn't edit it at all. I can delete it. I can make a new one, etc. And there's no code here. So once you drop dbKit into your project and start using the dbKit controls to create your user interface, and they are just subclasses of the existing controls. So they're not custom in that respect. They're just a subclass of the existing controls. Then it can load all of the data for you. And behind the scenes, all that's going on here, so if we go back to this button single, you can see what happens. I'm just looking at my pop-up to see which database you're selecting so that I can select the right database connection. In this case, it's the Eddy SQLite right here, right? So that's my Eddy's database, right? Okay. And once I've got a database, I've created a property in the app class, and that's where I'm storing the database connection because I want it to be available the whole time that I'm using the application. And as long as that's not nil, now this is something I've added, and you can see my to-do here. The user shouldn't have to call this, but this is adding data that tells it the relationships between tables so that it can do things automatically like load related rows and things like that. And then I just show the window. And that's it. Everything else is done generically and automatically behind the scenes. You just drop it in, so you don't have to write all that boring database code, or rather, code to get your data in and out of the user interface because dbKit does that for you. And again, we have this available for desktop and for the web. And to give you an idea of just how portable Xojo code can be, all of these classes that are not user interface classes like DB connection, and then if we go down to modules and go to internals, these are all the classes that are used behind the scenes. All of this code, all these classes, I can just copy and paste them right into a web app or into a mobile app because they're not user interface related, so the code just works without modification. So that's a great feature of Xojo in terms of cross-platform. Anyway, that's a very quick demonstration. I've also got two other examples in here. There's the separate window example. So you've got one window that has a search bar, and this is just another layout. You double click, and it opens the editor in a separate window. This is just so that you could see a different example. But again, there's like one line of code to open this window from this list box, and you can even open the invoices as well. So that's that. And then I've got a row only example where you would do a query and just, you don't want to provide a list. You just want to take them straight to the first record. And I've got a navigation bar control in dbKit that you can just drop on and you can navigate. Again, none of this requires any code. And there's your buttons for editing. So that all works the same way. So we got a toolbar in this case. Again, very, very quick. The current version of dbKit is available in Xojo. So if you just go to examples and go to databases and choose dbKit, you can also search for dbKit in our documentation to learn all about it. So that's dbKit. We're getting past an hour here, so I'm going pretty fast. Let's finish up so we can get to some questions. Porting code. Um, you know, the code in 4D is very different from the code in Xojo, but once you are getting comfortable with Xojo code, and that's why I suggest that you start with a small project, I think you'll find that the most effort you've put in is deciding on all of your logic. Once you've got, and because you've already got that worked out, porting it to Xojo is really just deciding, what event it goes in. A lot of our events are very similar, or, what method you need to create. And I think you're going to find that porting it is really not that bad. I'm not saying it's no work at all. It's some work. But I've found that when you're porting code, it's the initial effort you put into coming up with the logic of, when this variable equals that value, then do this and go into this loop and all that kind of stuff. So while that is a big job, it's probably not as bad as you're thinking. Now, in terms of reporting, we do have a simple report editor that's built in. You can check that out. But we also have the ability to, use graphics to draw straight to the printer. You can also draw straight to a PDF document. And like I said earlier, it's all the same whether it's the printer or PDF. Our report generator is it's okay. It's not awesome. For simple reports, it's great. It does need some work. We're aware of that. But again, you can take over the drawing and send stuff straight to the printer or to PDF, and that stuff is built in. Debugging. Okay, I'm going to show you our debugger, and let's go back to the form converter. And it's a class. It's almost all a class called form to window. And I mentioned you can't name something starting with a letter, so I couldn't call it this object 4D forms. So I called it DDDD forms. Anyway, so here's my class. It's got a bunch of methods. Most of these are just for adding individual controls. The converter, this is the method that does the conversion. And basically it's looping through all of the controls that I've hauled out of the form file, and it figures out what kind of control it is. Is it an input control? Is it a list box, a picture button, a progress, a radio? And then I have a method for each one. I'm passing in the control name that I've derived. Basically, the form in 4D is a JSON file, and I'm loading that. We have JSON parsing in Xojo, so I've parsed all that into an object in Xojo called a dictionary. A dictionary is just a group of key value pairs. So I'm getting the name of the control, and then I'm putting together a dictionary of properties, and I'm passing that into each one of these methods. So for example, let's go to Xojo button. Where is button? There we go. Okay, so here's Xojo button, and you can see its name and its parameters. It doesn't have a return type, and I'm creating a dictionary and assigning the controls dictionary to that, which holds all of the controls I've imported. Anyway, and then I'm adding my desktop UI properties, and this is adding individual properties unique to a button. So I'm going to just go ahead and put in a breakpoint. You can see these lines along here, and I'm going to run. And let's try importing something. Here, let's go to the simple one. Okay. All right. And it hit my breakpoint and it stopped. So here we are in the debugger. And um, it stopped on this line. And I can see my stack. So I pressed, this is the window one, button one pressed event. So you can see where it started. It got to here. It went into this method, Xojo window. So there's form to window, Xojo window. It got to convert. It called convert. There's convert. And it called add Xojo button. And here's that method. So it's just going down into these methods and it stopped here. So I can look back and see exactly the path it took to get to this point, and I can see the variables that are available. There's globals, that's just all the globals in the whole application. And then I've got a bunch of properties here, and variables here. I've got C, which is a dictionary. CD is the controls dictionary, that's here. I've got the name parameter and the source parameter. And self is one that we add, and that just points to the current class, in which case that's form to window. So then you just click on these things. Like if I click on CD, that's the controls dictionary. It shows me that there's 60 or 23 items. And if I click contents, I can see them. So there's all the names of the controls. And there's a dictionary for each control. So let's go to like first name, click on that dictionary, go to its contents, and there are all its properties, right? Just like you have in 4D. And I can see this is one I added. This is telling me what kind of control this is in Xojo. It's a desktop text field. And you can inspect these. I can click on this thing and see it if it's too big. I can see the length in bytes. I can see its encoding, and I can change encoding if needed. I can see the binary for it if that's what you need. And then you've got this hierarchy to get back to the top. If I go to form to window, that's the big class I created to do all this magic. And for example, there's the source file. That's the 4D form. That's a folder item, which represents a file in Xojo, and I can see all of its properties, its creation date, and if it exists or not, and its path, and all that stuff. Um, I can go to source, which is a dictionary. This is the dictionary that I created that I loaded all of the 4D data into. This is for this actual control. If I go to CD, this is the one that's all of the controls itself. So anyway, so that just gives you an idea of the debugger. You can step through your code, you can step over a method, into a method, out of a method, you can pause, it's all the normal stuff. We've also got threads, so you can pick if you have multiple threads running, you can pick a thread. We have had cooperative threads for a long time. We recently added preemptive threads. So you can actually write code where you generate preemptive threads that can run on any available cores. And if you have a job that can be sliced up into multiple jobs like on multiple cores, like parsing text and things like that, boy, or managing files, you can spread that out across all available cores and get some really terrific performance. But this is just a quick look at our debugger. We've got a filter as well, so you can search for things if you've got a lot of stuff here. There's a lot more to it than that, but that's just gives you a basic idea of the debugger. And I'm going to show you something really interesting. Let me bring up another project here. Let's go back to dbKit. Now, this is great for local debugging, but what if you need to debug, like I'm on a Mac, what if I want to run my project on Windows and debug it? Do I have to take my project, go put it on a Windows box, copy everything over, install Xojo? No, you don't have to do any of that. I'm going to bring up parallels. Now I'm going to do this on my Mac with a virtual machine, but you can do this with real hardware too. I'm just, for convenience, I'm using a virtual machine. All right, so here we've got Windows running, and I've got this app that we provide called the Remote Debugger. Comes with Xojo. I've launched it on Windows. And I'm going to go back to Xojo. And instead of pressing run, I'm going to go up to the project menu and I'm going to choose run remotely. Now I've set up my VMs here, and I'll show you how you set those up. You go to settings and you go to debugging, and you just add a row to this and provide the IP address, and if you want to password protect it, that kind of thing. So this is you don't set this up per project, you just set it up for Xojo and you're done. So you can do it with any project. So I'm going to go run remotely. I'm going to choose Geoff Windows. It builds the app. It sends it over to the Windows virtual machine. Let's switch back to there. There it is. There's the app running on Windows. And I can, click and I can click on rows and, I can search, right, etc. So that's the remote debugger. And if I ran into an issue, like watch this, I'm going to do something simple. Let's just put a breakpoint right here, right? And I'm going to run again remotely to my Windows box. I could do it for Linux as well. It could even be another Mac. It could even be a computer in another building, another office, another state on the other side of the world if you really wanted to. You'll have to set up the routing through the router on the other side so that the packets can get through, but it can be anywhere. So, all right, so here I am on Windows. I'm going to click the button and it's going to hit that breakpoint. Now remember, this is a debug version. So this is talking to the Xojo IDE. So I hit my button and bang, I'm in the debugger. And I can step through my code and see what's going on, even though the IDE is running on Mac and the application is running in on Windows. And you can do this with web apps too, by the way. So the web app can be running in your browser, and you can be debugging in the IDE. And that's just regular debugging. That's not even remote. So this is remote debugging because I'm going to a different operating system. So anyway, very quick look at the debugger. Okay, building your app. What's that all about? How do you do that? Well, let's go back and look at the IDE. You'll notice down here in the lower left corner, there's build settings. If you click on shared, the inspector shows you all the build settings that are shared no matter what the target is. So you have your version information, your stage code, copyright information. If you wanted to create a builds folder and put all your builds into that, you can do that. Do you want it to include function names? If you're really worried about security and you don't want someone digging around in your app, then you can turn that off and we obfuscate all the function names, which is really handy for security again. If you want to build it for a specific language, you can do that, but we do support building multilingual applications. So you can create constants in Xojo. I didn't show this, but you can create a constant and then you can fill in all the values for that constant for any platform and any language combination. And then you can use those in the interface or in your code. So for example, you could use one for the name of a button and you could have it all translated into every language. We also provide a utility you can use called Lingua, which you can give to somebody that's going to do the localization for you. And you can export all the constants out of your Xojo project. They import them into Lingua. They can do all the localization there and send the file back to you. So anyway, that's something you can do there. Optimization level. This is when you're, mostly this is when you're getting ready to build like a final version. The default is no optimization. You can choose moderate or aggressive. This is compiler optimization. So if you have code that's very, mathematically intensive, for example, you might want to, see what kind of performance you get by compiling at moderate or aggressive levels. Keep in mind, of course, that takes longer because it's doing more work. Does your app support dark mode? We have great dark mode support built in. That's a whole nother thing we could talk about. And do you support high DPI? Those are usually on by default. So that's the shared stuff. Then we get to the individual platforms. Now, in this case, it's a desktop app. So for Mac OS, I can give the name for my Mac app. I can choose whether it's going to be universal or just at x86 or just ARM. Your bundle identifier. If you want to have a minimum Mac OS version, you can enter that here. This is for stuff for the App Store. You can pick the category and stuff if you're going to um, uh, deploy your app through the App Store. We have that built in, by the way, both for Mac apps and for iOS apps. So you can deploy to the App Store right from the Xojo IDE. On Windows, we've got the things that are relevant for Windows, including if it's an MDI app or not, the caption, and what architecture. On Windows, we support 32-bit and 64-bit. On Mac, it's 64-bit only. And then Linux, again, we've got all the different architectures that you can, and each one has its own application name. So that's the stuff that you do. And then finally, we got this computer. And this basically just means if you check this checkbox, what you're really saying is build for the machine I'm on. So you don't have to specify Mac, Windows, or Linux. And basically, you pick your settings and you press build. Publish is for publishing to app stores. You press build and you wait while it builds. And so this is going to build. It's packaging it up. It signed it. And there it is. There's my app all signed and ready to be shipped off to a user. So that's building. And you can build for all, I could check all of these checkboxes and I would get Mac, Windows, and Linux versions, bang, all at once. So keep that in mind. Okay, I am going through this real quick. Support. So if you want to report bugs or make feature requests, we have a way to do that. It's at issues.xojo.com. Our bug base is completely open, so you can see, you can search for bugs, you can add feature requests, etc. I mean, there are some issues where the person marked it confidential because they were going to include confidential information, but 99% of the cases in there are open so that you can look at them. You can make notes, you can comment, you can like them if you want to find out when they change status, that kind of thing. We have a forum at forum.xojo.com. That's a great place to meet users and ask questions. We have tech support. You can get to that through our website. And any license gives you access to tech support. But we have a special kind of license called Xojo Pro Plus. This is our most expensive license, and it gives you the highest level of support. We handle those requests first. We'll get on Zoom with you if we need to. You know, this is for people where, hey, I'm really relying on you guys. So when I have a problem, I need to know that, that you're going to jump on it. That's what Xojo Pro Plus is for. I just want to point that out so that you guys that are going to be, if you're going to be relying on us, you know that there's a way to get an extra level of support. All right, we are finally at questions. So I've got to figure out how to get to the questions panel. Give me a second here. Let's see. Let's go back to Zoom. And I think I'm going to have to stop screen sharing. But I gotta find the Zoom. Let's see. Oh, there we go. Stop sharing. Okay, great. All right, so I've got some questions here. Let's go through them. If you come up with new ones, you can fill them in. All right, so first question is, for supported CPUs, you only listed ARM and Intel. Are there any plans to support Apple Silicon? ARM is Apple Silicon. Sorry, I should have said that. Apple Silicon is an ARM processor. So we've supported Apple Silicon since day one. In fact, I'm running on an Apple Silicon MacBook Pro right now. So yes, that is supported. Okay, next question. About referencing database fields in the styled text area. I'm not sure that's not a complete question, so I'm not exactly sure what you're asking. If you're asking, could you take data out of a database field and stick it into a style text area, you absolutely can do that. It's just a property, so you have full control over it. If that doesn't completely answer your question, you can email me at Geoff, Geoff, at xojo.com and give me more details, and I'll help you out there. Let's see, next one. What about inserting pictures and tables into a text area? 4D Write can do that. Yeah, we do not support that. Our text area, our style text area doesn't support that. It might someday, it doesn't right now. Okay, next question from Alex. I published a component years ago that exports a 4D structure into MySQL with relations foreign keys. Oh, that's good to know. Okay, Alex, you probably want to go on our forum and maybe, well, yeah, probably our forum would be best. And there's a database section of our forum, and you could, mention 4D and mention that you have that and post a link to it. Or if it doesn't, if it's just a 4D related thing strictly, obviously you can mention it on the 4D forum. But Alex Hines, yeah, he has I don't know, he didn't say what it's called, but he's got a component that'll do that export. That's great. Okay, Alex got another question. Is it possible to extend the built-in classes? For example, creating a specific version of the row set class for a specific table. Okay, yes, you can extend classes. Maybe not exactly the way you think, but you can add your own methods to our built-in classes. So if you wanted to add a method that accesses the data in a class that does something specific, that way it's available for any row set that you use, in your project, you absolutely can do that. There's an extends keyword. That's the one you'll want to look up. Um, but you can also subclass our classes as well, which is what I'm doing with dbKit. So yeah. Is there a database record class? We have it's called database row, and that's used in conjunction with row set. All right, let's see. Next question. Um, Rainier is asking, how does Xojo work with multiple developers in Git? It works very well. When you build an application or when you make a project and you save it, by default, it saves it as a binary project. It's just a single, well, not a single file, but well, the Xojo part's all a single file. But if you buy Xojo Pro, you can, when you go to save as, you can choose Xojo project format, and that saves it to well, I guess I stopped sharing my screen, but that saves it to a folder that has all of the layouts and classes as individual files, and those can then be shared, with any kind of version control system, including Git. In fact, we use Git and Subversion here at Xojo. Okay, another question from Alex. How does Xojo handle code, one monolithic file? Oh, I guess I just answered that question. So I think, Alex, you know the answer now. You can do it both ways, one file or many files. Luke is asking how to create a picture button in Xojo, pictures with multiple states. We don't have a picture button built in, but it depends on what you mean exactly. It's easy enough to use our canvas control and then just draw the pictures into the canvas and detect where the user's clicking. So that wouldn't be a hard thing. The canvas control is your buddy. You definitely want to learn how to use it because you can anything that's not built in practically when it comes to user interface, you can do in a canvas control. And there's lots and lots of canvas control examples. I'm sure there's a picture button example already in Xojo. Okay, Alex has another question. He says, I think he was trying to say this is the $1 million question. We trusted 4D, I did for 40 years, but they say once burnt, twice shy. Yeah, we understand that. So I have a large application, and at my age, I only have one throw left. How do you assuage my fears? You know, um, what's the situation like compared to 4D? Okay, we get asked this question all the time. We got asked this question in 1998 when we shipped version 1. And, how do we know you guys are going to be around? How do we know whether or not you're going to change things? Whatever. Um, all I can say, I mean, the real answer, the honest answer is you don't know, right? Because, I mean, we're all human beings. But what you can do is you can look at our history, right? So we have been around since 1998. That's when we shipped the first version. Most development tools that were around in 1998 do not exist today, and we do. If you look at our pricing over the years, our pricing, our scheme has not changed since day one. Our pricing hasn't changed much. We've offered different tiers because we added new platforms and things like that. But I think you will find, and you can ask on our own forum, we've been very, very consistent. We run a very, very tight shop here. We weren't venture funded. We're not owned by some bigger company. You're talking right now to the majority shareholder, and I have controlling interest. So, so I don't think you need to worry about that kind of thing. At least I would worry a lot less with us than I would with most other companies. That's being completely frank with you. And I'm very interested in seeing Xojo go on for a very long time, well past me, at whatever point. I want people to keep using it for decades. And we have been, by the way, we've been modernizing Xojo from day one, and we're very careful when it comes to backward compatibility. So if you went back to an early version, you might have to open it with certain versions to get it, to get the project file format to the current version, but most of that code and controls would just work. Oliver's asking, can you be precise about plugins in Xojo? I'm a 4D components developer and editor. And are there possibilities to integrate? Yes, we have a plugin SDK. Download Xojo, look in the plugins folder, and you'll find the plugin SDK. There's also documentation, on our website. If you have questions, you can email me or email support to get more details. But we have plugin developers, just like 4D does, that create plugins and sell them to the Xojo community. Okay. Alex is asking, with large row sets, is it necessary to page the results, or does 4D take care of loading the data as required? You'll want to some of the controls have that built-in capability, like the list box on web will page it'll dynamically load the rows. The list box and the pop-up menu and stuff on the desktop don't do that currently, but all the capability is there for you to add that yourself. In fact, that's one of the things I'm going to be adding to dbKit, is to make the dbKit list box dynamically load data, so that if you did a search for a million rows, it wouldn't load a million rows all at once. Okay. Oliver's made a statement, components with widgets. I'm not sure what he's asking there. If you could be more specific and update, or maybe type something in again, Oliver, I'll get to that. I'm not really sure what you're asking. Alex is asking, in a complex app with dozens of windows, can I organize that Explorer? We call it the Navigator, with folders. Yes, you can organize that into any number of folders, as many levels deep as you want. Yeah, you can totally do that. I didn't really get into using the IDE all that much. I don't use tabs, but you can have a tabbed interface in the IDE, and you can have different levels. I'm motioning with my hands as if you can see me. You can have different levels of down in the hierarchy on each tab. So you can have a tab in the hierarchy that's where you've dug down into a low level of your folder and you're just looking at that folder. But yes, that's completely doable. Okay. Alex is asking, how big is the company? How many people develop Xojo? We are not a big company. I don't believe that the size of a company is anything other than how expensive it is to run. And we run a very tight ship here. We don't talk about the size of the company, but people are usually surprised, considering the size of our product, how small we are. Having said that, the average amount of time someone stays at a company in tech is 2 years, and at Xojo, it's over 13. So people tend to come here and stay. I try to create the best work environment I can. All right. Somebody who's anonymous said, oh, okay. Someone was basically saying, if you want a button with a picture in it, I wasn't sure exactly that was the question, but we do have a bevel button, and a bevel button can have a picture and a caption, or just a picture or just a caption. So that would be an option. I think I looked up the picture button in 4D, and it was like multiple pictures, and you could click on any picture. So I don't think it's quite a bevel button, but it is there. Or maybe that's maybe that was a picture pop-up. I'm not sure. Anyway, we don't talk about the size of our user base. We have thousands and thousands and thousands of users. They're spread out all over the world. The sun never sets on the Xojo empire. Okay, that gets us through the question. I know I went really fast. I had a lot to cover, and wow, it was an hour and a half. So the good news is I've recorded this, and we're going to put it up on YouTube so you can watch it again, or again send the URL to other 4D developers. Get on our forum, start talking to Xojo users. They're a friendly bunch of people. Our engineers also answer questions on the forum. You can write to me, of course. I provide my email address, and you can get tech support as well, or write to customer service. And of course, explore our website for more information on pricing and things like that. I didn't want this to be that kind of a pitch. I really wanted to focus on the technology and what would the process be like of going from 4D to Xojo. And even if you're not going to port your database application or everything to Xojo, Xojo is a great general purpose development tool. It's a great tool to have in your toolkit. You'll be able to build things where 4D is just not practical. We use all native controls. Okay, so well, there's a couple places where we can't because it doesn't exist on a platform, but 99% of the controls are native, which means that they automatically adapt to all the changes in the operating system, the look and feel and features and all that stuff. We just get a lot of that for free. And we don't use anybody else's underlying cross-platform library. All the cross-platform code is our code from soup to nuts, from the front all the way down. So that's it. Thank you so much for coming, and I hope to see you on the forum. Bye for now.